Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Dr. Mike Brazier.
We have a very special and unique episode today, and the most unique aspect of it is that we have 4 guests joining us. It's actually the first time in any of our podcast episodes where we've had 4 guests. Another unique aspect is that our guests range in age from their mid-20s to somewhere, let's just say, north of the official senior citizen line. Sorry, John, had to do that. So what could we possibly be talking about that requires that many guests? Well, the short version is this. We're going to be talking about university-based programs that are designed to introduce wildlife students to the hunting experience. They have adopted the name University First Hunt Programs. We're going to get into a discussion about what these programs are, why they are needed, how they've been received, and we'll even hear firsthand from a couple of the students that have participated in these programs. So on today's episode, we have both the instructors and the pupils that will be participating with us, and that's why we need 4 guests. So let's welcome them in. And first, I'm going to go to John Eady, Dr. John Eady, Professor Dennis G. Raveling, Chair in Waterfowl Ecology at Department of Wildlife, Fish, and Conservation Biology at the University of California, Davis, and a repeat guest on the show. John, welcome in.
Thanks so much, Mike. It's great to be a repeat offender.
Second is Dr. Kevin Ringelman, Associate Professor, School of Renewable Natural Resources at Louisiana State University. Kevin, welcome in.
Good to see you, Mike.
And Maddie McFarland, Master Student at Mississippi State University. Maddie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Mike.
And last but not least, Julie Nguyen, a biologist with Gulf Engineers and consultant and a graduate of Louisiana State University.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Okay, so now what we do is we give each of our guests an opportunity to provide a bit more detail about your background, what it is you do, and whatever kind of career path you might have taken. So let's just start. Let's go in the same order that we did just a minute ago. John, I'll throw it to you. Tell our listeners, for those that might not have heard the previous episodes, what it is you do and where you are.
Well, thanks, Mike. So I'm the north of 61 here. I was actually brought up even north of that. I'm from Canada. Grew up in a dairy farm in British Columbia, sort of hunting, fishing, that sort of background. Went to school in Canada and then came down to UC Davis in 1995, where I was very honored to hold the Dennis Raveling Endowed Professorship at that time in waterfowl ecology management. So I've been here for 25 years teaching waterfowl and wetland ecology. Kevin was actually one of my PhD students a few years back and has really sort of exemplifies the success of the program. So it's great. It's great to be here. It's great to be anywhere. I'd like to be anywhere right now. We're in COVID right now, but thanks again, Mike. And it's great to be back on your podcast.
Thanks, John. And Kevin, let's go to you now.
Sure, Mike. So I grew up on the prairies of North Dakota. Both my mom and dad were avid sportsmen, and my dad was also, as you know, the director of conservation planning for the Great Plains office for Ducks Unlimited. So I grew up with both a hunting background and a science background, and ducks have sort of always been a part of my worldview. I did my undergrad at Cornell University in New York, and then immediately started the PhD program at UC Davis with Dr. Eady. Did a quick 10-month postdoc with Chris Williams at the University of Delaware, and then took this position at Louisiana State in 2015. I've been here ever since.
Thank you, Kevin. Maddie, let's go to you now.
Well, I was born and raised Baton Rouge, Louisiana, so in the city. I did my undergrad as well at Louisiana State University, actually under Dr. Kevin Ringelman, where I worked in his lab. After graduation, I had the great opportunity to work for Ducks Unlimited in the Great Lakes Atlantic region. And now I am back down south at Mississippi State University, getting my master's working on a terracing project in South Louisiana that some of your listeners are probably familiar with if they heard that podcast last year.
Thanks, Maddie. Yeah, that was one of the very first podcast episodes that we produced, I think. That's a project that I've been fortunate enough to work with you on. And so I'm sure at some time in the future, we'll follow up with another episode to kind of fill in the gaps on what we've learned through that study. But thanks for joining us today, Maddie.
Thank you.
And Julie, let's go to you now. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I was born and raised in Louisiana as well, but without any kind of hunting or fishing background. I was just kind of that kid that was always outside, and much to the horror of my parents, bringing in every creature I could get my hands on and all that good stuff. So I developed a love of nature and science in that way. And I started at Louisiana State University, graduated from the Renewable Natural Resources program, got a great background and got to meet some really great people. And now I'm working at Gulf Engineers and Consultants as a biologist, where I'm kind of a jack of all trades. Some days I'm in the field, some days I'm in the office and working with government agencies and doing all sorts of fun stuff.
Julie, when did you graduate from LSU?
In 2017.
2017. And Maddie, was that the same year that you graduated?
Yes, Julie and I graduated together. That's how we met.
So you actually were at LSU, same time Kevin was, and came through the program that we're going to be talking about under his direction, along with the other people assisting with this program. And so what we have today in terms of the number of the guests that we have is one of the small examples that we've talked about on previous episodes of this family tree within the waterfowl management enterprise, where John's the old guy on the crowd. In the crowd. And of course, as he mentioned, Kevin, we're going to pile on as much as we can, John. And of course, Kevin studied under you and now both Julie and Maddie.
I'm trusting the editors to edit this judiciously.
I'm sure he will. And then, of course, Maddie and Julie were instructed and taught at LSU under Kevin. So just a small example of this family tree that we've talked about on occasion. So it's pretty cool to have all of you on this. So let's transition to a discussion for today. And I've kind of introduced it as these university first hunt programs. And I've kind of referred to it in some of our emails as a new addition to the, quote, college curriculum. And I don't think it really qualifies exactly as a course. We'll get into that later on. But nevertheless, it's a fascinating new development in universities, at least two that we're going to talk about. And I think we'll also hear about the expansion of this effort to other universities across, at least universities in the U.S. I'm not sure in Canada or in Mexico at this phase, but I'm going to ask our guest about that. But the idea of this particular episode now was stimulated by a recent publication by Kevin and John and colleagues that described the program, introduced what they had done, why they had done it, and what the response of their administrators, their partners, and then, of course, most importantly, the students has been to this. And we thought it would be a great topic to bring to the listeners to make people aware of these efforts. And so rather than me ramble on about what this program is and why it's important, I'm going to turn to our guests because they're the ones most knowledgeable of this. And Kevin, I'm going to start with you just to give you an opportunity to introduce how this came about. You were the lead author on this paper. Now, I know, John, this program might have been in existence at UC Davis prior to LSU. And so we're going to, once Kevin finishes, I'll give you an opportunity to kind of chime in with any of the early thought process and motivation that might have occurred at UC Davis. So Kevin, just introduce the University Hunt program and what it is. And let's just start with why it's important.
Sure, Mike. So when I arrived at LSU, there was an existing hunt program. It started in 2008 under Dr. Frank Rower, who I succeeded. He is, of course, a giant in the waterfowl field and is now the president of Delta Waterfowl. So I stepped into his professor role here at LSU, and this hunt program was in place already. The genesis of this program came about because so many of our students who were incoming had never experienced hunting before. They have a background similar to Julie's, where they have a love of nature, kayaking, birding, hiking, whatever it is, but they don't have that consumptive hunting experience. And that's concerning to us for a number of reasons. One is it's important if we are producing the next generation of waterfowl and wildlife scientists that they understand the worldviews and motivations of the hunter constituents that make up a large part of who they will serve as future professionals. There's also some concern that hunter numbers have been declining, right? And this is one avenue where we can introduce the next generation to see if they enjoy hunting. And maybe this is something that they would want to take up. If hunting intersects with a lot of millennial and Gen Z values of sustainable protein and ethical treatment of animals and things of that nature. So at LSU, we sort of have a two-pronged approach for educating our students about the values of hunter, introducing them to the individuals themselves so they can see the passion and the habitat work that hunters do on the landscape, and providing a mechanism for hunter recruitment.
John, anything to add to that? Was the UC Davis, did it precede the work at LSU, or did they come around about the same time?
Oh, I think they're actually all of our work. I got to give credit where it's due. I think, at least for us, the genesis idea goes way back to University of Wisconsin at Madison, where Scott Craven and Don Roosh had a camp like this. And I can't remember how long ago that was. Kevin might remember, but it certainly preceded any of our efforts. And they used to do it for a whole quarter, and they would have game cooking and decoy carving. They have some old time, almost market hunters come into the class. And then that ebbed away. Don Roosh sadly passed a number of years ago. So in our case, that was sort of the genesis of the idea. And I've also got to give credit for the Conservation Leaders for Tomorrow. So they've actually, I think, taken Scott and Don's idea and have folded that out. But it's not for university programs. It's for professionals. But the idea is there. So it's been around for a while. For us, it was, again, Kevin said it correctly, is our concern as we were seeing students coming through in our wildlife major, even students in my waterfowl class. So that's a specialized class. It's not required of students that have an interest in waterfowl. Only something like 35% of them have ever hunted. I take a survey at the beginning of every class. So, and ours wasn't so much about hunter recruitment. I mean, that's important. If they get interest in it, that's great. It really was a concern about we were producing the next generation of wildlife professionals who had no firsthand knowledge of a major constituency, a major source of support for wetland and waterfowl conservation. And they were going to, move on into positions of sort of policy decision making and so forth. So that was a real concern. We really needed to make sure that I felt like we were providing inadequate education. It wasn't something that we could tackle directly in the classroom. So that's where we had to partner up. So, for all the same reasons that Kevin mentioned, ours isn't so much, sort of an R3 recruitment effort. Great if it does that. It's an education effort. Kevin?
Yeah. And I'll just add that the hunter recruitment aspect is sort of a secondary goal, but I liken it to a foreign diplomat, right? So a successful foreign diplomat needs to have an understanding of the language and the culture in which they are operating, right? And so that's what we're seeking to provide is an exposure to the hunting culture so that our students can more successfully navigate as professionals.
John, I have one question for you. Then Maddie and Julie, I want to come to you for your perspective on this program when you first learned about it. John, you mentioned that there was the percentage of students coming into your program that have hunted is somewhere in the neighborhood of 35%. Have you been tracking that for some period of time, and have you seen that percentage change?
It's interesting, Mike. So we do the hunt camp the first weekend in January, and my waterfowl class starts in January. And so typically, maybe 10 or so students in that camp take my waterfowl class. They haven't taken it yet. And it's interesting, those that take the camp, and so they've actually hunted once, identify as hunters after that one camp. It's a shift. So since we started teaching the camp, all of a sudden that percentage went up, and I went, whoa, what's happening? And then I realized it was all the students that the weekend before had been on the hunt camp. So that kind of, that also speaks to the introduction and the mindset and the change in perspectives that the camp provides, that students who were unfamiliar and would not have identified themselves as hunters beforehand did so afterwards and did so with a sense of accomplishment. So yeah, that has changed, but by and large, I think if you just took a survey, in California, it's a little bit different, I think, than Louisiana, Mississippi, but the percentage of young people coming into the wildlife major who have backgrounds in hunting and fishing. And the question was, have you ever hunted or fished? Not do you regularly, have you ever? So 35% or so had ever hunted, about 70% had ever fished. So it's a very it's a very different changing constituency. And as educators, we need to be aware of that and to make up some of that education. That's for me, the important part of these camps.
So Julie, you came to LSU, and when you got there, this program already existed, as Kevin had talked about. Is this one of the programs that is sort of like legendary among the students? I think back to my time at Mississippi State summer camp, the grueling 6-week period that we go through is called summer camp, was the legendary aspect of that curriculum. Did this kind of fall into that same category? Did you know about it early on when you enrolled in the program, and was it something that you look forward to?
I wouldn't say that I knew about it right as I started the program, but as we went along, it kind of became a culmination of everything that we learned, and we kind of started to hear about it a little bit more as we progressed through our academic careers. And so it was just so perfect how the way the whole curriculum was set up, where we would learn about these things and slowly become more and more hands-on. And then at the end, it's just kind of this beautiful end goal of everything coming together and actually participating in everything that we had learned about and seeing it firsthand. So I think that's really special. Now, is this required part of the curriculum, or is it sort of an elective? It was optional. With our wildlife techniques class, we were just given the option of whether or not we're interested in going on a hunt, and I was definitely super interested.
And so, Maddie, from your perspective, growing up in Louisiana, you and Julie both, I know, as you've indicated, you are around outdoor activities all your life. And remind me, had you hunted before, Maddie?
No, Mike, I hadn't. Like Julie, I did not come from what some people would refer to as a traditional hunting background. My parents didn't hunt. I had some immediate family members who did, but I was never personally exposed to that. So when I got to LSU, especially in the Renewable Natural Resources program, a lot of my fellow students and constituents, they hunted, but no, I had never even picked up a gun by then.
And so was this something that you got excited about and you knew right off the bat that once you heard about it, that you wanted to do it?
Yeah, well, if you had asked me freshman year, I probably would have been pretty hesitant about it. But when it came around, I was so excited. Like Julie said, it was a culmination of everything that we had learned, or at least it was an avenue, a route that we could take based on what we had learned in the classroom. And I definitely wanted to take that plunge. Was it a pretty easy sell just the idea that you would get an opportunity to hunt for some, maybe that's motivation enough to participate in the program. But also, as Kevin and John have talked about, the importance to the profession, given the program that you were in, was that also readily apparent to you, and why it was important to you to go through the program? Yeah, definitely. It's also mentioned in the paper, in Dr. Eady and Dr. Ringelman's paper, how this better prepares us to understand the needs, the wants, the desires of a part of the people or a group of constituents that we will be working for eventually. And I do think that there is a different level of understanding from learning about something in the classroom, hearing about it from family and friends, and then experiencing it yourself firsthand.
Now, I want to ask a question to Kevin and John about the demographics of the participants in these programs. Obviously, Maddie and Julie are both women here joining us, and so Kevin, let's just start with you. I guess a couple of questions to this. What's the demographic breakdown of the participants in the program at LSU? And can people that already hunt, that already have hunting in their background, participate in the program?
Sure, Mike. So as Julie mentioned, this University First Hunt program is an add-on to an existing wildlife techniques course. It's a senior sort of capstone style course that every wildlife undergrad in our program has to take. And so the demographics of that class is probably 70% female, and that's reflective of the larger sort of wildlife program that we have in renewable natural resources. And so the demographics of those who hunt reflect that 70-30 gender split. And so the majority of students that we take hunting in any given year, we do close to 35 hunts a year, are women. Most of them are first-time hunters, but we've chosen to not disallow someone from this experience just because they hunted once, when they were 10 years old with an uncle or something, right? So it's important that everyone that we can accommodate have access to this experience, because I think it's just really important for building that professional capacity to network with hunters.
And John, what about UC Davis, the demographics of the participants there, and is that reflective of the demographics in the program, sort of when I say program, I'm talking the wildlife program at UC Davis. Well, I'm talking about the demographics of the participants in the first hunt program, and then, how that compares with demographics and trends within your overall university program.
Yeah, sure. Well, certainly the same as at LSU. I think 70% of our majors are women. There's not a lot of ethnic diversity, unfortunately, particularly in California. So that's something I think, as a profession, really need to work on. But about 70% of our undergraduates are women, and that probably reflects the same proportion in the camp. Unlike LSU, we do restrict our camp to people who've never hunted before. That's actually a requirement. The reason being is, again, this is students that have hunted before have at least had some exposure to it. There's so many students who've had no exposure to the whole process, so we wanted to open the door to them. We get 2 or 3 times as many applicants. We can take 15 students per year on our hunt. We get 45. Initially, it was as many as 75, and we really had to curtail that. We have all of our students write an essay beforehand stating why they want to take this camp and how it will help them professionally. So they have to sell us on what they're going to get out of the class. And it also says that there's a little bit of buy-in and motivation. It's not just like, it sounds like a fun weekend, I'm down. We also didn't want all of our hardcore hunters going, I'd love to go up to Birdhaven Ranch for a hunt. It's a fantastic duck club. So we, unlike LSU, and I get Kevin's point, we did restrict it to folks that had never hunted before, with the express purpose of giving them the opportunity, as Julie and Maddie mentioned, to actually experience it. You just cannot learn from, sitting in the classroom. You've got to experience it.
Kevin, do you require any type of pre-participation, pre-program essay, and then a reflection similar to that once the program has been completed?
We haven't. I think that the model that John's talking about is a good one because it makes students sort of reflect on what they're going to get out of the experience, and then the post-hunt reflection is important too.
Mike, I will say, if I can, one of the things, and particularly because our camp is sponsored by a private individual, Paul and Sandy Bonderson, and they really enjoy reading the post-camp essays. And in terms of a transformational experience, it's the before and after comparison I think is really interesting and really informative. So, it's not just a matter of sort of an entry essay that they have to write. It's also about capturing some of that personal growth from the student's perspective. And it's really fun to read those essays and see, what the students felt and said beforehand, and then what they felt and experienced afterwards. It's quite profound, and Paul and Sandy just love it. I don't mean to be saying it's necessary. I'm just saying that the entry essays and then the after camp reflections have really been a bonus. It's been really fun to read those and really quite informative.
And I will say that we have our students, write thank you notes to our private individuals that host us at their duck clubs. And John, is it fair to say that, at least my perspective is that the students, by the time they hit senior year in our program, are very much they've gotten a background in hunting as being critical to the wildlife management enterprise. We have a very sort of standard North American model value of hunters throughout the course of the program. And so they've reached a similar place in their motivations, I think, more similar than I think UC Davis students. Like, we don't have any vehement anti-hunters in our program typically, where I know that you're dealing with a slightly different demographic.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true, Kevin. I don't know that we have sort of the antis, but there's some that are, and even students that we accept into the camp intentionally say, I'm not sure how I feel about this. So, we don't want to bring people in who are going to, sort of lay across the blind and, sort of make a personal statement. There's places for that. That's fine. I respect that. But that's not the intent of this camp. I think our students actually get it. They get it in all the courses about the intellectual importance of hunting. And I used to think that might be enough. And I realized when we first started doing this camp that it's not. The actual hands-on experience, the actual making a decision to take an animal's life is hugely profound and hugely transformational for a student. It's a fork in the road. And that's really when learning is hard, is when in those challenges about really pushing yourself to a limit and making it a fundamental decision. And for us, that's when the students really get what conservation is about. They buy into it. So that experiential component, I can talk till I'm blue in the face in the lecture, and they get the background. They know the importance, support wise, et cetera. But until they actually do it, and I didn't realize how impactful
John, I've heard you talk about some of these experiences. You've kind of recounted some of what you've heard from some of the students, generally speaking, and their reaction, the transformational nature of those experiences. And I remember hearing you talk about it. The hair on the back of my neck just kind of stands up sometimes, just because it is just so. It's such an emotional connection to the resource when you actually kind of think about it that way, and you do this. And that's why I'm really excited once we get a little bit later on in this episode, or maybe the next one, to hear from Julie and Maddie on their specific experience in this regard, and what the range of emotions that they went through as well. I think that's, as you said, John, one of the most fascinating and important aspects of this entire effort. Now, I want to go to Kevin and ask about some of the mechanics of how this works. And when you're talking about something associated loosely or officially even with a university and involving hunting, it probably raises all sorts of questions and logistical challenges. So, Kevin, talk about just some of the mechanics of how this works. What do the students have to go through in terms of hunter safety, gun training, shooting training, all those types of things? And how long is this course? How long does the program take from start to finish?
So at LSU, our administration has been pretty positive on this being an aspect of the wildlife management techniques course. And so we treat the actual hunt experience and the associated trainings and shootings and things like that as a field trip. And so in the eyes of our administration, it's no different than the forestry students going out into the field with chainsaws or drip torches. It's dangerous, and appropriate safety precautions should be taken. But so that's how they view it in their minds. In terms of the actual mechanics, we teach hunter safety in-house here at LSU. So I'm a certified hunting education instructor, as are some of my colleagues. And so for a few evenings in mid-September, we will convene the students after hours in one of the lecture halls and go through the standard hunter safety. They do you have to shoot a shotgun in order to complete your hunter safety training and receive your certificate. So we do that at one of the local ranges here in Baton Rouge. And then as of last year, we're starting to take our students on a full sporting clays course that's sponsored by Delta Waterfowl. So they get a lot of experience handling a gun, using it safely, and just becoming more comfortable. Because one of the experiences that both John and I have noticed is that our students are timid around firearms if they haven't held them before. And so just things that longtime hunters take for granted, how to safely load a shell the correct direction, muzzle control, right? All of these things that are second nature to a lot of longtime hunters need to be reinforced for hours in new shooters. And so in order for us to feel safe taking them into the field. We split our students among 4 or 5 different camps, hunting both waterfowl and deer. And so there's some sort of quasi-lottery system for who gets to go on what hunts. But most of our hunts are early September teal season, so the last couple weeks in September. And on the given weekend of the hunt, I or one of my colleagues will chaperone a group of a half dozen students out to a private duck club. They'll stay overnight. Oftentimes there'll be a little more spring play shooting. And then on either the Saturday or the Sunday, we'll go out with guides that are provided by the private duck clubs and hopefully shoot some teal. They come back from the blinds, and then we pool all of the birds for scientific dissections in lab next week. And then we save the meat for a communal cookout at the end of the year.
Kevin, I have to question some of your thinking on introducing new hunters to this experience in September in Louisiana. That's it's still like 95 degrees that time of year.
It's hot and there are a lot of mosquitoes, but all of our students are pretty used to that.
Absolutely. John, anything to add to that? Obviously, California is different from Louisiana in terms of, well, a number of things, but I know there is a slightly different association in California. So talk about the differences there.
Yeah. So, I mean, we couldn't do it through the university. When we started thinking about our camp, when I got here back in 1995, we realized, California, especially, concerns about guns and everything else. There's no way we could do this through the campus. And I explored that a little bit, and they said, no, guns on campus or students handling guns, that's just not going to happen. In spite of this being, sort of an ag school and a land grant university. So I sort of, I was sort of pondering that and thinking about the Scott Craven Don Rouge camp, and was talking with Paul Bonderson about it and saying, boy, I'd love to do something like that, but I don't think we could pull it off in California. And this was also with Bob McClandress, who at the time was the president of the California Waterfowl Association. And they said, well, we run youth camps all the time. We'll do that. So our camp is not actually UC Davis camp. UC Davis gets a lot of credit, but it really is for our students. It's not a course that UC Davis offers. CWA took on all the liability. They have all the trainers. They provide all the equipment, and Paul Bonderson and Sandy Bonderson underwrite the whole process. So it really is a community effort, and it's for UC Davis students. We do the same things as Kevin does. They all do their hunter safety. It's a weekend camp for us. So they do all the online hunter safety training. They come prepared to write the exam, and then we do the hands-on. So Paul has a fantastic sporting clay course. They get shotgun safety as well as training. And for some of our students, they've never handled a firearm. Even if we did not go out on a hunt, the empowering nature of just, having a student know how to handle a firearm safely, all of a sudden it's like, this is not a weapon. This is a tool, and I can handle this. And that is just incredible seeing and some of these kids are, they're way better shots than I am first time out. Oh, Kevin, don't laugh.
But I can laugh though.
Yeah, you can laugh. Yeah. And, that's not a very high bar, but, and that's pretty phenomenal. And then we also do archery and we also go out in the wetland. We do early morning bird ID. And a big part of it is talking about wetland conservation and private stakeholders, all the resources that Paul and Sandy put into that, 3,000 acre, fabulous wetlands and all the benefits that birds get. So they get the whole thing. The safety aspect is a big issue. CWA, to their credit, California Waterfowl Association, George Oberstead, Bob McClandress, Jake Meserly, they were really instrumental. We could not have done this in California without partnership of an NGO and without the sponsorship of somebody as visionary as Paul Bonderson, who was the DU president, and Sandy. They've just been so supportive. So a little bit of a different model. We only do duck hunting, and it's in January, but in California that could still be pretty warm and there's still mosquitoes.
Maddie, I want to ask you and Julie a question here about the firearms aspect of it. Had you, so you said you didn't really come from a family that was active in the outdoors, and so I'm guessing this was your first experience handling a gun. Maddie, was that one of the more intimidating aspects of it? And what were your thoughts and kind of reactions as you went through that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like I said, this was the first time I'd ever shot a gun. So I can distinctly remember sitting in Hunter's Ed the night that we worked on gun safety and having that gun put in my hand for the first time, being intimidated for sure. But like Dr. Edie said, it is such a feeling of empowerment to learn how to safely and properly use a firearm. You break down that barrier of fear to a certain extent, and you do look at it differently, especially in the way that guns are viewed in the United States right now. It's a whole different perspective once you get to experience that.
And Julie, was that much the same way with you in terms of was handling the gun one of the, at least as you were thinking about it, was that one of the more intimidating, uncertain aspects of it as you got into this?
Oh, definitely. I remember being so excited for the opportunity to go hunting and then kind of realizing, oh, I have to use a gun. And unfortunately, up until that time, I saw guns as weapons and not tools. And so going through hunter safety and all of that and using and practicing, loading, safety, muzzle control, all of that really helped me realize that it's a tool and not a weapon. And just like Maddie said, I distinctly remember being in hunter safety, and as soon as they put the gun in my hands for the first time, my palms were just completely sweaty and I was just so nervous. But I remember feeling very at ease the more I handled it, and being around true professionals and having that reassuring kind of atmosphere really helped me.
I read in the article one of the programs, maybe both of the programs, used a BB gun as sort of an introductory gun. Is that true in both cases at LSU and UC Davis?
So in our camp, they actually do shoot pellet guns. We have 3 stations on the weekend. The first thing they get out, and they shoot pellet guns. They do archery, and we also have a trap station. So, and the students rotate amongst the 3, and the idea is just giving them experience with different ways of hunting. I mean, we have an archery instructor as well who comes up and talks about bow hunting and so forth. So they get exposed to all of them, and they get to try all of them. The pellet guns is just a way of getting them a little bit more familiar with, firing something that actually isn't going to, provide much kickback, and that they feel quite controlled.
Waterfowl hunters know the importance of identification of waterfowl species because of regulations and how they come into play there. And I know that was an important part of the process that you led your students through. So just talk a little bit about that, and then the actual experience of getting in the field.
The way our camp is structured, it's over a weekend. So the Friday night and the Saturday is really about the training, the hunter safety certification. They all have to pass the hunter safety test on the Saturday night before they can get their licenses and go the next morning. And so the Saturday, we do pellet gun training, archery training, shotgun training. They spend the whole afternoon on Paul Barneson's fantastic sporting clay course. So they really get a full day of activity. The Sunday morning is actually when we do the hunt, and that itself is pretty special. One other thing we do on this Saturday is we spend time, we go out early before sun up and do waterfowl ID and identifying the calls. Many of the students have done that in labs. I think it's a little bit more meaningful for them because they know they're going to need those skills the next morning for the hunt. And so they're paying attention, and they're also using the things that they've learned in the labs. So it's and we're also walking around the marsh and talking about marsh management. We do a tour with Paul on his property. So they really get a sense of how much investment goes into managing a wetland. You don't just add water and walk away. And then the Sunday morning hunt is with a single guide. And that in itself is just a goldmine for us. So each of our guides are actually quite senior folks in the waterfowl and wildlife profession, from DU, CWA, Fish and Wildlife Service, Cal Fish and Wildlife. These are people that are volunteering a Sunday during, pretty primo part of the hunt season to come out and guide these students. They get a one-on-one guided hunt at a fabulous duck club. I mean, at a DU auction, this would be thousands of dollars. And there they are with an experienced guide. There's the safety issue, obviously, but also somebody who's helping them pick up on the ID, say, okay, shoot now, look at that bird coming in. All of that. And I also tell them they've got a captured interview for 3 hours in a blind with a senior person that they could be talking about professional development, career opportunities. And I also tell my students, no matter what, that person can't leave. They're in the blind with you, and you are never, ever in your life going to get a 3-hour one-on-one interview with a senior waterfowl professional to talk about what's important to you. So, I mean, there are days, bluebird days, when they don't see a lot of birds, the students don't get a lot of shots. But even that by itself is just a huge benefit of the camp. So the whole gamut, from bird ID, firing a shotgun, being in the marsh when it wakes up in the morning, picking out birds. We do ask every one of our students to be willing to make the choice to shoot. So it's not a bird watching, enterprise. In the earlier years, we had some students go along and say, yeah, I decided not to shoot, but I really enjoyed the morning. And we want them to be willing to take that full measure of commitment, to engage themselves in this, to really understand what it's about. So, and they all do. It's just phenomenal. And some come back with limits. I'm envious.
And so, John, it's about more than just reducing that public trust resource to private possession, as is described in your article. It's also about the culinary experience, the cleaning of the bird, recognizing what happens after you pull the trigger, retrieve the bird. And so, did the UC Davis or the program you have in California incorporate some elements of that as well?
Oh, absolutely. So after the hunt, same as what Kevin does at LSU. So we all come back, the students have their birds, and we go through cleaning. I mean, Mike, it's getting hard even just to be able to do dissections in a biology lab now, with good reason, frogs or whatever else. I mean, and so now the students, we've gone through all the anatomy in class. Most of these students have taken my bird class, if not my waterfowl class. And so now we're dissecting birds, and they're learning parts of the body. They're prepping the birds. And then Holly Heiser, who's just a fabulous, she's the education director at CWA, and her husband, Hank Shaw, who's written a number of books on wild game cooking. So they come out and talk about, how you can cook ducks. I mean, it's just phenomenal. These kids just get sort of a primo experience. And we don't do a communal feed like Kevin does. The students all take their ducks home and then they invite each other over. But that's where there's also a spin-off, because then they feed their roommates and the roommates get into it, or they share the birds with their family and they go, wow, this is really good. We've had vegans come out on the hunt, Mike, and they go, I don't like to eat meat, but I will always eat wild duck. And so they like the idea of how it lived, and how it's pesticide free, it's antibiotic free, true free range, so it really does sort of fit with the locavore sort of idea as well. So yeah, we go sort of top to bottom, from identification to consumption.
That's fantastic. What I'm just trying to figure out if I can go back in time and actually enroll in that program somehow. We'll have to figure that out, John. Sounds great.
Yeah, you got to do the essay. Have you ever hunted before, Mike? Oh,
no, never have. Matter of fact, not very good. Does that qualify?
Yeah. Some people have tried that. Yeah, we find them out.
Now, Kevin, a bit of a contrast. Still the same message, the same things that you're trying to accomplish, but as John kind of referenced, you do more of a kind of communal meal later in the year, I believe. And so tell us about the difference in kind of what happens after the hunt for your program.
Well, a lot of the differences stem from the fact that the UC Davis program is very much a full weekend camp experience. And so our students are going out primarily just for the hunt, although they do see a little bit of marsh management at the sites where that's appropriate. There's not as much of a focus on bird ID in the fields because they've had that in a bunch of classes. They've learned to age and sex waterfowl by wing from my class and their wildlife techniques class. So our program is when we're in the field, we're focused primarily on the hunt itself. We bring back unclean birds back to LSU campus, and we store them usually until the next week. And then we have a focus on scientific dissection, especially to study what the birds are eating. And then we sort of relate that back to habitat management and things of that nature. I guess the other point I wanted to make, what John does with the mentorship at the UC Davis camp, I think is incredible. In the field, our students get sort of the other half of that. So John's students get professional development. Our students get this 18-year-old Cajun's view of marsh management. And in a lot of ways, like that lived experience of growing up in the middle of nowhere, Louisiana, hunting every day of your life, every day of the season, guiding for wealthy hunters and things like that. I mean, they see changes in the marsh that we don't see because they're out every day. And I think that insight can be really valuable. They're also, it makes for an interesting contrast, we'll say, when we bring our students out. So it's a ton of fun, and those guys do a great job. But back to after the hunt, right? So we do scientific dissections, and then because there's often a lot of unevenness in if our students were successful or not at their given clubs, or simply asking a first-time shooter to hit a blue-winged teal is sort of a tall order. And so we've taken the approach of sort of pooling the meat. If students have a limit, they're welcome to take home some of their birds, but we keep some of it back and then have a communal cookout at the end of the year as part of the wildlife techniques course. So there'll be venison backstrap and teal tacos and a bunch of stuff. It's a good tradition.
And now at LSU, I'm guessing that's in association with some college football tailgate, or am I wrong in that regard?
I think Maddie and Julie can answer that. I think they typically do it on the last day of lab instead of having actual class. They go outside and have a cookout.
Okay.
Sort of celebration.
That's probably wise. Otherwise, every other person there around you would come raid the table. You might not have enough to share.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's probably going to be a good place for us to wrap up this episode. And we have a lot more information to cover. So, Kevin, John, Julie, Maddie, thanks to each of you for joining us here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks so much, Mike.
We extend a very special thanks to our guest on today's episode, Dr. Kevin Ringelman, Dr. John Eady, Maddie McFarland, and Julie Wynn. We greatly appreciate them sharing their time with us, sharing their stories and experiences related to the University of Hunt program. We certainly hope you have enjoyed hearing those, and we hope you plan to stick around for the next episode. As always, we thank our producer, Clay Baird, for the great work he does on every aspect of this podcast. And to you, the listener, as always, we thank you for your time, your support of this podcast. And as always, we thank you for your support, passion, and commitment to wetlands and waterfowl conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.